Hi, welcome to this tutorial on how to design Graphistudio Matted Albums. My name is David Medina and I am a destination wedding and portrait photographer based out of San Antonio, Texas. For this tutorial, I will be using Fundy Designer, but everything I will show you can be adapted to any album design software that you use. As always, please leave any comments, questions, and suggestions below. Before we go any further, it is a good idea to download the Info Matted Album document as it contains all the measurements and specifications for the matted album. You can do this by going to your trade area, then look on the technical information sections. Following these guidelines will help us avoid unnecessary delays as well as expensive mistakes. If you have not done this yet, I suggest you pause this video and go download it before watching the rest of the tutorial. Designing Graphistudio Matted Album is easy. We just need to pay attention to a few simple rules. But to make it easy on us, Fundy Designer will enter some of the specifications when we tell it that we're designing a Graphistudio Matted Album. We just need to check that the numbers are correct and we are ready to design our album. In Fundy Designer, we'll be able to either design our matted album manually or using the auto design feature. But very important, while Fundy Designer will enter for us some of the specifications, it is imperative and our responsibility to make sure that these numbers are entered correct and applied to the album type and size we are designing. I cannot emphasize enough that you should check this before you start designing your album, and then again before you send it to Graphistudio to be made. On the left, we have the Info Matted document downloaded from the trade area, and on the right, we have the album settings in Fundy Designers. Let's take a closer look at how these rules are used to set up Fundy Designer for matted album design. First, let's look at the margin. The margin is the space between our images and the edge of the page. This is represented by the letter A, and the settings are found under column A. We can find the margin we need for the album we want to design by looking where column A intersects the row corresponding to the album size we're designing. The margin we select will determine where we can and cannot place our photos in Fundy Designer. This is called the safe zone. In Fundy Designer, the safe zone will be marked by a green box. Think of it as coloring within the lines. You will need to place your images inside the safe zone. Let's look at an example now. For a 12x16 matted album, we need to look where the row for 12x16 intersect column A. That number, 1.37, will be our margin. In Fundy Designer, we will enter that number where it says safe zone. Next, we need to make sure that the bleed is set properly in Fundy Designer for the album size we're designing. The bleed or trim line or cut line is where Graphistudio will cut the block. In Fundy Designer, the bleed is called the cut line. For a 12x16 example, look where the 12x16 line intersects the bleed column, and that will be our bleed. For a 12x16, the bleed is 0.20. Next, we need to pay attention to the spacing between the photos. This is shown by the letter C. For example, look at where the 12x16 row intersect column C, and that is the minimum space required by Graphistudio between images. If you look at Fundy Designer, you will see that it has 0.05 instead, which is incorrect. You will need to input the right number. Let me put it another way. The number given under column C for the space between images is the minimum space required, but you can have more space if you want to. So for now, for a 12x16 example, enter 0.31 in the image spacing. The number for the auto design buffer can be found under column B in your Info Matted Album document. For a 12x16 example, look where the 12x16 row intersect column B. It says 1.18 inches. However, if we look at in Fundy Designer, we see the number at 1.17. The number provided by Fundy is close enough that you can leave it as is or use the one from column B. It's up to you. Finally, we need to tell Graphistudio where to cut the holes for the mat for our images. We do this by adding a black stroke around each image. On the stroke width in Fundy Designer album settings, enter a stroke of 2. That should be enough. Now, we are ready to design. But before we go to Fundy Designer, let's get familiar with the matted album options, features, and other important selling points. Now, let's look briefly at the album design workflow that I will follow in Fundy Designer. I will be designing a 12x16 matted album. First, we will get the specifications for the album from the Info Matted Album document. Then, we will set up Fundy Designer to design a 12x16 Graphistudio Matted Album. Before we start designing, we will open the album settings and make sure that all settings are set according to Graphistudio. We are now ready to start laying out our album in Fundy Designer. We can manually design the album, or we can use the auto design feature. Our last step before we are ready to upload the album to Graphistudio is to make sure that the album was designed with all the correct settings. I call this the pre-flight check. And that's it. We are ready to export and order our matted album. Before we start designing an album in Fundy Designer, the first thing we need to do is to gather the measurements and the specifications for the album that we're going to be designing in Fundy Designer. As we said earlier, we get that from the Info Matted Album document that we downloaded from the trade area. Now, once we have that and we have the numbers that we need, we're going to tell Fundy Designer that we're going to be designing a Graphistudio 12x16 matted album. We do that by selecting the album tab, clicking on New Album, selecting Graphistudio, click Next. We have two options, either Matted Album US or Matted Album Europe. The difference is one is in inches, the other one is in the metric system. I'm going to check Matted Album US thin mount, and we're going to click Next. The difference between thin mount and bevel mount is that the thin mount, the maximum number of pages you can design on a matted album is 60 pages. On the bevel mount, the maximum number of pages you can design for a matted album is 40 pages. Okay, the next thing we need to tell Fundy is the format and the size. The format is vertical and the size is 12x16 thin mount. So we click Next. We're going to choose the basic cover. Next. Now we are going to give the album a name. Use something descriptive, something that reminds you and tells you what it is that you design. I'm going to say there's a 12x16 and that is a matted album. That way at a glance I know what I did. I'm going to create album. Now, Fundy Designer is going to let us know that because we are designing a matted album, that we need to use the corresponding matted design set that are found in the design library. If you already have installed them, just click OK. If you haven't, then just click up in Design Library. And here you'll be able to do that by selecting on the type. You're going to select Album, Matted Album. And then you're going to see that the design set for the matted album. Different companies, you're going to look for the one for the Graphistudio. As you can see, they're all installed. Also, I just click Close and I'm ready to start my design. But before we start laying out the album, we need to make sure that all the settings are correct. There's 3 settings that Fundy Designer will insert for us, but there are 2 that we have to do ourselves. So we need to make sure, it's our responsibility to make sure that all are correct. So we're going to go to the sprocket wheel and we're going to select the album settings. The first one is the cut line, which is the bleed. Because we're designing a 12x16, we're gonna go on the matted album info document. We're gonna go where that 12x16 line on the vertical intersect the bleed, and it tells us it's a 0.20, which is what Fundy Designer inserted for us. Next, we're gonna do the safe zone. The safe zone is column A, again, where the 12x16 row intersect the column A. It says 1.37. As you can see, Fundy Designer installed that for us. Next, we're going to do the auto design buffer. The auto design buffer, we're going to find it in the column B. So 12x16 row intersect column B, it says 1.18. In this case, Fundy Designer inserted 1.16 because of the math that it does. The difference is so inconsequential that you can leave it that way. Or if you want to be very precise, you can insert 1.18. It's up to you. Finally, the next, we have to do it ourselves. They are not inserted by Fundy Designer at all. So that's why we need to check this, because we have to make sure at least that we enter those 2. Okay, the next one is the image spacing, the space between images. Again, that's column C. If we go by 12x16 row and we go to where intersect column C, we see it's 0.31, so we're going to go here to where it says image spacing, and we're going to type 0.31. Next and last is the stroke width, which is what tells Graphistudio cut a hole here. Stroke of 2 is fine, and now we're set. Now the next thing we need to do is we're going to start designing the album. The way I approach this is that I just gonna use this view, the one we have right now, to drag images into a spread. I'm not gonna be concerned about how they look within the spread or how they are placed in the spread, but rather I just wanna drag those images that I think are gonna look good on that spread and tells the macro story of that spread. Each spread has to be like a small story that fit within the larger story of the album. So the first one is going to be the first spread, which I'm going to use a photo of the couple. The next one, I'm going to use a photo that I have that sets the mood where this wedding was. Next, we're going to do, typically I do the details of the bride, and usually I can put an image of the bride getting ready or something like that. Next, I'm going to use some images of the bride getting ready. Like these 4 images here, so I'm gonna drag them there. And as you can see, I'm not concerned about how they look within the spread. I just creating little stories spread by spread. And let's do this one. That is the bride getting her shoes on, held by the bridesmaid. This one is very cool. Sort of this one. Then let's do some of the bride. This 4 of the bride will look good in the spread. And then I'm gonna use this one basically by itself. And one of the great thing about Graphistudio Matted Album, because they're custom designed for us, everything is customly done for us, is that we can have one spread be flush mount if we want, and the next spread be matted. So we can combine both technology within one album as long as the spread is matted or the spread is flush mount. You cannot combine both technologies into one spread. Okay, so once that's done, and now we're gonna see where the design sets are gonna help us. Now I'm gonna go spread by spread. Like for example, let's take this one. Obviously, it's not set up properly for a matted album because, as we discussed, each image has to be, or the images have to be within the safe zone of the green lines. This one is not. This will cause problems, and when production will stop and let you know that you need to fix this. So you're gonna waste time and maybe even money. So we don't want that, right? So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to layout, and on the layout, I'm gonna go to on the design set, and I'm gonna select the Graphistudio Matted Vertical, which I installed. But now from now on, every time I click on layout, the only options that I'm gonna see are the ones that will match a vertical matted album with the spacing correct and everything else. So let's say this one, let's do this one, and that looks kind of cute. Let's move this one over here, and that way we can create this one. So as you can see, everything is within the boundaries of the safe zone. So the software is doing this for us. Next, we're gonna go to the next one again. This one is within the safe zone, but we may want to change the layout. So we go here, and we can see all the different layouts. Like for example, that one. Let's change this with this, and that looks good. Everything is within the green boundaries of the safe zone. We can obviously resize as long as everything stays within the safe zone. If this goes like this is wrong. It won't work. Graphistudio will let you know that you have to fix it. Same thing with this. We have to have a minimum of the 0.31 inches that we put on the settings, because that the space of the matted, it has to be there. So once that's done, let's assume that we finish and all the spreads are. We need to do a pre-flight check before we go, and we're gonna go here and we're gonna check, make sure that everything was as we set it, as what the document tells us, and if it's okay, then we are ready to export and order from Graphistudio. Okay, let's design our matted album, but this time we're gonna use the auto design feature from Fundy Designer. The workflow is exactly the same. The first thing we need to do is to get the measurements and the specifications for a matted album. We get that from the Info Matted Album document that we downloaded from the trade area. Next, we need to create the album within Fundy Designer. So we're gonna go to the album tab. We're gonna click in New Album. First thing we need to do is to tell them that we're designing a Graphistudio album. Next, we need to tell them what matted album we are designing. We have two choices: the matted album Vival mount or theme mount. One of the differences is that the theme mount maxed out at 60 pages, while the bevel mount maxed out at 40 pages. So we're gonna select Matted Album, Thin Mount. We're gonna click next. Now we need to tell her what format and what size are we doing the album. We're doing a 12 by 16 and it's vertical. So we're gonna look for Matted Album 12 by 16 Thin Mount. So we select that. We're gonna click next. We're gonna click basic cover. We're gonna click next, and now we're gonna give it a name. Make it something descriptive. 12 by 16 Matted Album. That reminds me exactly what I did, what kind of album I designed. So I'm gonna create album, and because Fundy knows that we're designing a matted album, it's gonna remind us that for a matted album we need to use one of the designs sets, one of the matted design set. They're found in the design library. I'm gonna click OK because they're already installed. The next thing we need to do is we need to verify that those entries that Fundy Designer did for us for the album settings are correct, and then we need to enter the two remaining ones. So we do that by going to the sprocket wheel and selecting the album settings. The first one is a cut line, which is the bleed line. We find the bleed line by looking at the album size that we're designing, which is a 12 by 16. That row intersects the bleed column, and it says it's 0.2. For the safe zone, we look at column A and it says 1.37, which is correct. The third entry that Fundy does for us automatic is the auto design buffer. That is column B on the info matted album document. For the 12 by 16 is 1.18, while Fundy says 1.17. It is so close and the difference so marginal that you can leave it as is, or you can enter if you want to be real picky and really precise about it. You can enter the 1.18. The two numbers that we do have to enter every single time we design a matted album are the image spacing and the stroke. The image spacing is the space between images, and it's column C. Column C for the 12 by 16 is 0.31, so we're going to enter 0.31. For the stroke, we're going to enter 2, which is plenty. The stroke tells Graphistudio where to make the hole. And we are done with the settings. We click OK. Now we can design using auto design. Now to use auto design, the only thing we need to do is go down here to auto design, click on it. We're gonna tell it how many pages we want to design. In this case, I'm gonna choose 50. I'm gonna use all the images that I have available because I pre-selected the image before I went to Fundy. So I know those are the images I want to use for the design. There are 84 images in my case. I'm gonna tell them that I want a minimum of 1 image per spread, and I want up to 4 images per spread. I want to keep this minimalistic. I want to keep it clean because of the matted. I want to keep a lot of white space. It gives it a feel of fine art album. Next, we need to tell the design style, and here is where the design set comes into play. We need to tell them that we want the Graphistudio Matted vertical. This is going to tell the auto design that when it places the images on the spread, it needs to use the vertical set. Next, we can tell them that we either can do the entire collection of the filter image. In my case, I'm doing the entire collection. And we can tell them the order in which we want Fundy Designer to use our images. I'm going to tell them these file names, but you can choose capture date also or a custom order. So in my case, it's file name, and I'm going to click design. And you're going to see that it's real quick. It's done making the preliminary design. It's not perfect. We need to go spread by spread and make sure that we make the tweaks that we want, that we design it the way we want. For example, the first spread, I only want 1 image, not 2, and make that change. That's probably what it'll do. I'll just drag this image in between the 2 spreads so it creates a new page. I can move this here if I want to, or I can make it a flush spread. Remember, in Graphistudio Matted Albums, you had the ability to create one full spread that is flush mount and the next spread to be matted. As long as each spread is either flush or matted, you have no problem. You cannot mix them both. As you can see in the overview, you can judge each spread to see if it tells a micro story, and then you can see if the story flows from spread to spread. But what is very important that once you're done doing the full design, that you're gonna go spread by spread, making sure that your image is within the boundaries of the safe zone, which is the green square or the green rectangle that we see here. It has to be within that green box. As you can see, there both are. So you're gonna go spread by spread, making sure it is that way. If, for example, you get to the spread and it's something like this is wrong, it won't work. So you need to adjust it and bring it into the safe zone. If you make certain that either when you're designing manual or you're designing in auto design, you make certain if you use the design set that correspond to your matted album, you should have no issues. It is your responsibility to go spread by spread to make sure that every spread is correct according to Graphistudio requirements. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. Once you're done going spread by spread and making sure everything is within the green box, you're going to go again to the sprocket wheel and you're going to verify that everything is as you set it. If everything is set up properly, you're ready to export and send your album to Graphistudio.